So the first thing Republicans do when it appears that they're going to take control of the House is what? Set up an investigation of Hunter Biden. Yes, you heard it right. Let's talk about it in today's video. Hi, I'm Mike Greiner. I'm a lifelong Democratic activist who's concerned about the direction our country is taking. I'm also a lawyer and an academic, and I'm here to help you stand up to the BS of the MAGA crowd. So in one of the more unbelievable press conferences, which is really saying something when you're talking about Republicans in Washington, the Republicans held a press conference announcing their investigation into Hunter Biden's business dealings, claiming that they had all kinds of evidence supporting allegations that President Biden was a knowing participant in these business dealings and that he had been selling his influence overseas. It didn't take much of watching the press conference, though, to realize that they had no evidence and that this was just going to turn out to be another example of the Benghazi syndrome of the Republicans. Investigate, create all kinds of noise and trouble, never resolve anything, but take a political bite out of your opponent. Because after all, winning is all that matters as far as these Republicans are concerned. Oh yeah, all those promises about dealing with inflation or crime or the border, all that stuff, oh, that's all forgotten. Now they get to investigate. So let's check out this press conference. Now you should know this is a highly edited version of it because it just goes on for nearly 40 minutes with basically the same thing being said over and over and over again. I'll post a link to the video of the press conference down below. But let's just kind of hit some of the highlights here.
Today we're going to provide you with something that you all aren't used to with respect to congressional investigations, and that's evidence.
Okay, now watch this. He says he's going to provide evidence. Now let's see what he actually does provide.
Committee Republicans have spoken with multiple whistleblowers from numerous schemes involving the Biden family.
Okay, so they've talked to whistleblowers, none of whom they're going to name throughout this. So they're basically relying upon unnamed sources. One of the people, though, whose name has come up repeatedly as a whistleblower in this situation is a guy called Anthony Bobulinski, who is a guest of Trump's at one of the debates in 2020. So definitely a nonpartisan, unbiased source. Let's keep watching.
Viewed Hunter Biden's laptop and received documents of previously unknown transactions.
Okay, let's start with this. We've all heard about the laptop and how it wasn't released, and part of the reason that it didn't become very public is right before the last election, you had that incredibly reliable source, Rudy Giuliani, shopping around information from this laptop without actually providing the laptop or the data to the media organization so that they were able to verify its authenticity. Since then, there has been some research. It does appear that this might actually be genuine. But I'm sure you've heard the allegations that there was this cover-up right before the election. Well, the reason that there was this quote-unquote cover-up is that Rudy Giuliani refused to provide the information that it could be verified. But let's set aside the question as to whether this is legitimate or not. Let's just assume that this is legitimate and accept all the arguments that are being made by these guys and see what evidence they actually have. Let's keep watching.
2019, shortly after announcing his campaign for president, Joe Biden told the American people he had nothing to do with and never had conversations with his family about their business dealings. That was a lie.
No, what's a lie is what he just said. In fact, they're going to go through this whole press conference and they're never going to show one piece of evidence to show that Joe Biden ever had any contact with these people about the business dealings. Let's keep watching.
Whistleblowers describe President Biden as chairman of the board.
Ah, yes, whistleblowers describe. That's the old, we have unnamed sources that say. Well, when you start relying on unnamed sources, well, you know you've got a problem. Let's keep watching.
For these businesses, he personally participated in meetings and phone calls.
Again, the source of that are these unnamed whistleblowers, one of whom, the only one who we know about, it was a guest of Trump's at one of the debates. Let's keep watching.
Documents show that he was a partner with access to an office.
Okay, let's start with what these documents are that show that he was a partner with access to an office. There was an email on this laptop that suggested that this company that was being set up, that was going to do business trying to essentially deal with energy issues in China. Now, to be clear, this business was set up after Joe Biden was vice president. He was no longer in office at this point, and it dissolved before he announced he was running for president. So in other words, the entire time that this business is at issue, Joe Biden himself was a private citizen. I think that's a key point to bear in mind. It's not like any of this was happening while Joe Biden had any office. So even if we assume that Joe Biden was involved, he could have been involved because of the fact that he was a private citizen at the time. But even so, he wasn't involved. And all the evidence that they provide to say that he was involved is either these unnamed sources or two emails, one in which James Gilliar, one of the associates in this business called Oneida Holdings, said that 4 partners would get 20% each, except for Jim Biden, who is Hunter Biden's uncle, who would get 10%. And then there's a question in the email that says, quote, 10 held by H for the big guy. Now, again, there's no mention of Joe Biden anywhere in this email. There is this mention of the big guy, which Anthony Bobulinski, that reliable source who was Trump's guest at one of the debates, said was Joe Biden. So let's even assume that was Joe Biden. The email does not say that they're going to give 10% to Joe Biden. It simply asks, should there be 10% set aside for the big guy? Again, assuming it was Joe Biden. Well, as it turns out, we know how the interests of the business were divided up because those documents are public record. And guess who is not a partner in the business? Yes, you'd have that right. It would be Joe Biden. Joe Biden never got any percentage. So there was this email that they're pointing at that they say, oh, he was involved in this business. He was a partner in this business. When in fact, they were simply asking, one of the other partners was simply asking, should we set aside 10% for the big guy? And if we assume that it's Joe Biden, it turns out he never got a percentage of it. So the answer obviously was no. And yet here Republicans are claiming that he was a partner in the business. What's more is that James Gilliar, the author of that email, told the Wall Street Journal in 2020, quote, I would like to clear up any speculation that former Vice President Biden was involved with the 2017 discussions about our potential business structure. Now, again, let me clarify something and emphasize something here. This was 2017. This was after Joe Biden was no longer vice president and before he had declared that he was running for president. And he says, this is the guy who wrote the big guy email, quote, I am unaware of any involvement at any time by the former vice president. So much for this allegation that Joe Biden was a partner in the business. The allegation also that Joe Biden had access to an office for the business is based on another email. In the fall of 2017, Hunter Biden wrote an email to a building manager that said, quote, please have keys made for new office mates, he wrote, listing Joe Biden, Jill Biden, Jim Biden, and Gong Wen Dong, who's a Chinese representative of the energy company. And in the email, Hunter Biden also asked that the signage be updated to say, quote, Biden Foundation and Hudson West CEFCUS. Now, to be clear, Joe Biden is not on the email. He didn't send the email. This email just supposedly says that keys should be made for Joe Biden and Jill Biden. And again, this was in 2017 when Joe Biden was a private citizen. But as it turns out, the Biden Foundation never rented space in that office. And the company that manages that building has stated publicly that 4 keys were made available, but they were never picked up. So in other words, Joe Biden never got a key to this office that he supposedly had access to. And what's more is the signage on the door wasn't changed. So you've got 2 allegations here. One that Joe Biden was a partner, which now we know was not true because of the fact that we have the documents showing that he never became a partner. And 2, that he had access to the office, which he didn't have because the keys were never picked up and the Biden Foundation never rented space in that building. Aside from the fact that this all happened while Joe Biden was a private citizen, while Donald Trump was president and Republicans controlled both the House and the Senate. If the Chinese were looking to get somebody on board who was able to peddle influence, that was pretty weak influence he was peddling indeed. Let's keep watching this press conference.
To be clear, Joe Biden is the big guy.
Again, we'll assume that that's true. Even if that is true, He never got a part of the ownership interests of this business, number one. And number two, he was a private citizen at the time. Let's keep watching.
This evidence raises troubling questions about whether President Biden is a national security risk.
Okay, now this is where it starts to get interesting. This is an example of projection. As my mother used to say, when you're pointing at somebody, 3 fingers are pointing back at yourself. All this is a way to muddy the water and make it seem like Joe Biden, who I think most of us believe is a genuinely good person and honest person, even if we disagree as to how much energy he has or his mental capacity or anything like that. I don't think anybody believes that he's some kind of master criminal by any stretch of the imagination. But they're just trying to muddy the water to try to essentially say, oh no, Joe Biden is just like Donald Trump. That what Donald Trump did, it wasn't so bad because that's what politicians do. Look at Joe Biden's doing it. What am I referring to? Well, of course, I'm referring to Jared and Ivanka, who were employees of the White House while Donald Trump was president, even though it was a violation of the nepotism laws. Jared, despite being exposed to all kinds of state secrets, it turns out, was never able to get a security clearance. And what's more is there are a couple of facts that are absolutely not in dispute about Jared and Ivanka's time at the White House. And remember, this is while Donald Trump was in office, while they were working in the White House. So this is not while Donald Trump just happened to be a private citizen. Number one, Jared did not disclose his ownership interest in several business ventures when he started working at the White House. Number two, Jared and Ivanka made somewhere between $172 million and $640 million in outside income. Now, the $640 million figure has been widely reported. In fact, it's an estimate. This is the way these reports work, is that they say, oh, the value of this is between this amount and that amount. And the range that they're talking about, when you add it all up, comes to somewhere between $172 million and $640 million. So even if we talk about the lesser amount, $172 million, that's still a buttload of money. A whole lot of money for a supposed government executive to be making. Third, we know that within 6 months of leaving the White House, Jared Kushner got $2 billion invested into a fund of his by the Saudi Sovereign Wealth Fund. Now, the managers of this fund had actually recommended against making that investment, saying it was a bad deal. But that recommendation was overruled by Mohammed bin Salman, the Saudi crown prince and basically the dictator of the country, who had a close working relationship with Jared Kushner, and who, by the way, also raised gas prices right before the election. That certainly gives the appearance of impropriety, but at least at the time, Jared Kushner was no longer working for the White House. So let's just kind of treat that the same way that we're treating these other alleged business dealings of Joe Biden. The one thing that is not in dispute, though, is the fact that they did make millions of dollars off of outside income while they were working in the White House. Fourth, the day before Ivanka was appointed to her White House position, she applied for 17 new trademarks from the Chinese government. Typically, those trademarks take a long time to get approved, but as it turns out, in May 2018, ZTE, a Chinese electronics maker, was penalized by the Department of Commerce for essentially spying and violating sanctions with Iran and North Korea. However, within weeks, President Trump overrules that decision, and magically, shortly thereafter, Ivanka gets her patents approved. Now, none of these things that I've stated dealing with the Kushners and the Trumps are speculation, and they're all on the public record, and I'll link to the documentation down below. And in fact, the source of the information on the trademarks for Ivanka is Forbes magazine. Not exactly a liberal rag by any stretch of the imagination. So that's what's really going on here. They're trying to muddy the water and claim that somehow what Trump and the Ivankas did isn't that bad. Well, this video has already gotten kind of long, so I'm going to cut it off there. But as I say, I will link down below to the documentation I have as well as the press conference if you really want to suffer through the entire thing. I had to. But you can be confident as a supporter of Joe Biden's that, number one, despite their claims to the contrary, there is no evidence that Joe Biden was involved in any of Hunter's businesses. And number two, that Joe Biden was a private citizen at the time all this activity was happening anyway. A private citizen during the Trump administration when the Republicans held Congress. So it's not like Joe Biden even had any influence to sell at the time. So it doesn't take much critical thinking to see that this is basically just complete BS. Well, if you want to see another video that I made a while ago exposing the BS behind another one of the Republicans' conspiracy theories, check out this video I did over here a while ago about the infamous Steele dossier that we've heard so much about. I'll see you then. In the meantime, let's hope for continued progress. Thank you.